My name's Patrick Casal. I am the owner of All Things Private Practice, which is a coaching business to help therapists start and grow their businesses. Have the All Things Private Practice podcast, and I host international and domestic retreats as well, and own a group practice here in Asheville, North Carolina. It's my second time doing a webinar with y'all at Spruce, and did just have throat surgery in October. So just going to be honest and open like I always am, and just letting everyone know my voice is not where I really want it to be, but I'm happy to talk about a lot of important topics today.
Thank you, Patrick.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Jessica Goolish. I worked at Spruce for over 6 years now. I've been working with Patrick for almost as long. Really happy to hear what the topic is today. I think it's relevant for everyone, whether you're a therapist or even just, a business person at Spruce. So looking forward to hearing what you're going to talk about. And we may have some people that are new to Spruce. So kind of just wanted to give a little overview of what Spruce is in case you're curious.
Oh, we're getting to that slide.
Oh, sorry. I got ahead. Okay. I'm calling in from San Francisco. And I'm loud and talkative because I have not had throat surgery like Patrick. So I may be talking a bit, but feel free to put the Q&As about Spruce, about Patrick, about anything, and we will get to them. And again, this will be recorded and we will email it to you because that question gets asked about 10 times. So nice to see everybody.
Perfect. Thank you, Jess. And I definitely didn't want to cut you off, but we're getting to you in one more slide. First, we're going to just let Patrick talk a tiny bit about what All Things Private Practice is.
Thanks. Yeah, so I started All Things Private Practice back in August of 2020 as Casal Coaching. Really just wanted to help therapists start and grow their businesses. I had been doing that in Asheville for years for free or for coffee or for lunch. So my apologies to everyone who's paid me since that time. But what I realized was that everyone wanted to leave their community mental health agency jobs during COVID. And it was finally time for me to work through my imposter syndrome that had been holding me back from launching this business for years, because this idea existed as an idea only. And I always convinced myself the pretty common imposter syndrome thoughts of nobody's ever going to pay you. Other people already do this and probably do it better and have larger audiences. You don't know enough about what you're talking about. All the things that can go into that paralyzing perfectionism, self-doubt, insecurity mindset. And finally, I just decided to launch it. And since that time, it's been surreal, honestly, like between doing individual coaching and group coaching programs and retreats and podcasts and speaking at conferences, like the ability in the mental health field and profession is limitless. Your skills are applicable in so many ways, but it really is about working through the own inner doubt or harsh criticism and self-doubt and perfectionism and the stuff that really prevents us from moving forward. I never thought in a million years that I would be getting ready to leave to host my second annual retreat that's happening in Ireland during St. Patrick's Day in 2 weeks for entrepreneurial therapists. That just feels like a dream. And I definitely did not foresee that when I started my private practice back in 2017.
Love it. Love it. Thank you, Patrick. And I know that some of the people on the call may have joined us back in June of last year, where you've shared a lot of great content as well. And we're just so excited to have you here again with us because you cover so much great territory. Now, Jess, I'm going to let you just quickly speak to what Spruce is in a nutshell for those folks joining us today who are not as well versed in Spruce.
Hi, Spruce is a HIPAA compliant patient communications software. So we do everything from in-office phone systems to virtual phone system, meaning being able to call from a business phone on your personal phone, to an e-fax, video telemedicine, asynchronous telemedicine with health assessments like PHQ-9s. We also do extensive SMS texting, secure messaging through an app. And then all of that's able to be collaborated upon with your team, which is really, I think, where the power of Spruce comes when you're trying to scale your business and be efficient with how your patients are being handled and their communication. So, but happy to answer any Spruce questions towards the end or as they come up. And I'm available after the call over email.
Awesome. Thank you, Jess. With that, let's get into the meat of this and talk about simple strategies that can boost your business this year. Getting right into the heart of it. Patrick, you've obviously done an incredible job growing your own practice and helping others do the same. And you just touched very, very briefly on overcoming your own imposter syndrome. I'd love to hear you wax on about that since it's such an important topic.
Yeah, I think this topic comes up so often in the mental health spaces, but also in the entrepreneurial spaces for those who are just not therapists. And imposter syndrome is so much more than insecurity. It's really that feeling that you're feeling like you're fraudulent, like you're incompetent, like you don't belong here, like you kind of lucked into your success. There's a lot of ways that it shows up with paralyzing perfection and shame and self-doubt. And really what happens is we're stepping into something that's unknown, that we don't know how to do, that feels unfamiliar. Maybe it's starting your private practice, group practice, your podcast, your coaching business, whatever your goal has been, or just simply thinking about leaving your agency job. And all of a sudden, imposter syndrome shows up. Why would anyone hire you? Why would anyone pay you X amount of money when you don't have these certifications behind your name? Why would anyone come to you if you've never run a business before? Who are you to go out on your own and start your own business or leave your safe, secure, and also most likely emotionally abusive community mental health job? There's lots of reasons that starts to surface. And for the majority of us, I know we've experienced this, whether it's with startup, with growth, with stepping into something new. But a lot of the times it also comes up when you have a bad clinical interaction, when you as a therapist and your client just aren't on the same page, on the same wavelength, the rapport isn't there, and you leave your head, you leave yourself thinking, what am I doing? I don't know how to be a therapist. Or you're sitting across from a client thinking, this person needs a therapist. And you're like, oh yeah, I'm the therapist. So it really is self-doubt. It's that entrepreneurial insecurity. And a lot of times it also surfaces in comparison traps where we're thinking, I'm not doing as much as so-and-so is. How come my private practice isn't full like so-and-so? I see this person talking about how they made X amount of money in their first year. How come that's not happening for me? Again, convincing us I'm not as good, I'm not as competent, I'm not as confident, I don't know what I'm doing. And for a lot of us, unfortunately, it leads to quitting way too early, or when, in my opinion, which is even more painful and just is worse in general, never even trying. Never even trying to pursue the thing that you are passionate about or you feel really energized by, and convincing yourself to play small and convincing yourself you don't really know what it would take to get something off the ground, or you could never be successful. Your ideas are better suited for somebody else. And it's painful. And a lot of this is rooted in neuroscience and the RAS, the reticulating activating system, that's kind of developed through our genetics and through biology and his prehistoric times where we were out in the wilderness and we were either prey or hunting, and our brain is saying, step back, you're unsafe. This isn't a good decision for you. And it was really useful because what that's doing is it's keeping you from being harmed. But now with how that shows up in the entrepreneurial world, in the private practice startup world, when you're pursuing this journey, it's I'm stepping into the unknown. This feels unsafe. I don't know what the outcome's going to be. I'm scared of what can happen. And your brain starts to shut it down. The idea then just stays in your head. It never goes into action. It never goes into the movement stage. And then all of a sudden, you are burnt out at your agency job, or you're feeling really resentful, or you're feeling like you might even give up the profession because it's just not suited for you anymore. And there are lots of ways this comes up. You'll see this in therapist Facebook groups all the time, talk about it on my podcast constantly. Normalizing making mistakes, giving yourself permission to fail, permission to make mistakes, because we get into perfectionism and expert mode. And then all of a sudden, I can't release my website yet because it's not perfect. I can't put my Psychology Today out there and publish it because the picture isn't great. Instead of realizing that we have to move through imperfect action, kind of building the plane as you fly it, because there's never going to be a perfected process. But we really get into that psychological part where it says, if it's not perfect, I can't put this out to the world, because then I'm open for criticism, feedback. People may say I don't know what I'm doing, and we can come up with an endless list of reasons why we might not do something. But there are lots of strategies to overcome this, and that's definitely something I want to talk a little bit about too.
So what kind of tips would you say? Like, is it self-talk, or what other strategies would you say work to do this? Because I think it's in all parts of our lives that this can come up.
Yeah, I was
It
just
is.
going to
Free
ask
advice.
for sure, because it happens across industries. I feel like it happens in just about every job. So I'd love to know your strategies, Patrick.
Yep. And it does come up in every job. I think for therapists and helping professionals, you're going to see it a lot more intensely because we're trained to be introspective. We're trained to kind of really dig deep and process how we're feeling and what's happening beneath the surface. So you see it a lot more when we're kind of more attuned to how we're feeling emotionally and how we're showing up. But you see it in every profession. And imposter syndrome is also firmly rooted in colonialism and patriarchal society and messaging. Like, if society is saying over and over to populations of people, you're not as good, you're not good enough, you're not competent enough, we just let you be here as of today, then of course that narrative is going to exist. All the research on imposter syndrome was really done in like women in the workplace in the 70s, specifically on women of color. Hasn't been a ton of research otherwise in imposter syndrome. But I believe that it's also rooted in attachment wounding, inner child wounding, like you're not good enough, your self-worth is tied to your sense of achievement and your next achievement. And if you fail, then there's something wrong with you. So there's a lot of this stuff that's really deeply rooted. But some strategies that work, and they work really well. Number one is like, we all know what it's like to question our abilities and our sense of self and have self-doubt. You've all started a new job or grad school or a program where you probably the first couple of days and weeks felt really insecure and didn't think that you were going to be able to complete it or understand how to learn how to do it or learn the processes. And then a month later, it's like, oh, I could do this with my eyes closed. We all have those examples and we need to be able to stockpile them. So what I suggest doing is creating a folder on your computer, a Google Drive folder, label it your accomplishments, your anti-imposter syndrome folder, whatever you want it to be. And you put in all of those examples into a Google Drive doc. You put in pictures, testimonials, accolades, times that you felt like you weren't going to be able to see it through, where you actually were able to persevere. So you can fall back on that when that irrational side of the brain is saying, no, don't try this. It's too scary. Don't try to take this risk for whatever reason. So that's strategy number one. Absolutely have one of those. Number two is we talk a lot about self-compassion in mental health therapy world and in the profession, but self-compassion is huge here. Giving yourself permission to make mistakes, whether that be by writing on a post-it note and maybe putting it somewhere visible. When you start something new, you're going to make mistakes. When you started to ride your bike for the first time, you probably fell off of it, got yourself back up and tried again. I don't look at mistakes as failure. I look at it as ways to learn how to do something differently the next time around. So it's actually great for us to learn how to do that through failure or mistake making. So trying to give yourself permission to know that when you start something new, you start a private practice, you start a group practice, you go to grad school, you start a new job, you're going to make mistakes and that's okay. So really going easy on yourself so perfectionism doesn't take over. Another strategy that I really like is making it playful. So what I mean by that, and for any of you that are watching right now that are Harry Potter fans, I am not, by the way, but it's a good reference point. There's an image in there, the Bogart, which is a fear that the kids have. And the way they get through this is by making it playful, putting roller skates on a spider, things like that, giving it a funny voice, a funny name. So eliciting that playful response, making imposter syndrome funny, giving the voice a funny accent, giving it a funny name. So when perfectionistic Patrick shows up, I can kind of quiet it back down. And in reality, it really does take a lot of the power away. I really believe in the power of just putting it out to the world too in safe spaces. So whether it's with friend groups, colleagues, mentors, your own therapist, a coach, whoever that may be, being able to say, I want to start this thing. I want to do this thing, putting it out to the world, because when it lives inside of our head, that's where it feels really scary and intimidating and overwhelming. But once you get it out of there, it's like, oh, the world is still spinning. It's okay. And it feels like the weight kind of drops off your shoulders. So really trying hard to do these things in a way that makes it really easy for you to work through the stuff that can really prevent you and be really debilitating and frankly, really painful.
Yeah, I I feel everything you're just saying. And one thing I'm going to throw out there that helps me personally, I read something once that Nicole Kidman said that every time she shows up for a job, she feels like a total imposter and like everyone's going to just find out she's a terrible actor. And I thought, that's incredible. So it really does affect each of us in a very unique way. But when I think about someone who I see as incredibly accomplished doubting themselves, then I can say, okay, look, Carrie, you can get through this too. She's a superstar, and anything I'm feeling, I can overcome.
Absolutely. And if you Google search, that's something I actually wrote today. Just examples of celebrities or famous people who experience imposter syndrome, you're going to see a very long list, including people like Michelle Obama and Oprah Winfrey, Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou has a great quote that says something like, I've written 11 books in my lifetime, and I still feel like they're going to find me out and let me know that I don't know what I'm talking about, that I'm a fraud. And just imagine doing that and still feeling that way. But I do think the more you work through this, the more imposter syndrome kind of rides along in the sidecar next to you instead of steering the car. And it gets a lot less debilitating. I don't think it ever goes away completely, and I do think humility and some self-doubt is really important. We just don't want it to dictate the decisions that we make and how we move forward.
Yeah, I have one quick question, and then we'll move on to the next slide. Do you think some of this imposter syndrome is born from people challenging us, or there's like a perceived challenge, someone actually saying, well, you're not as good as I thought? I mean, is there any of that, or is it completely born from within us?
Oh, I absolutely think it's born from that as well. I can think of instances that you could use as an example. You get a C on your math homework or C on your report card in math and all A's otherwise, and your parents, instead of talking to you about your strengths and learning how to do things differently, tell you, what's wrong with you? Like, how come you didn't get an A in this class? Like, how come you didn't do as well in this one? What is there something wrong here? Are you stupid? Like, are you just not as good in this subject? That gets ingrained in us very early on. And we can all think of these examples that we've experienced either in childhood or early adolescence or young adulthood, where we've had mixed messaging from people who care about us and are supposed to coach us and are supposed to support us. So I think that there is a huge correlation here between messaging that we receive and how we feel about ourselves and our abilities.
Yeah.
We just got a question in just about this specific topic. And I think it's just going a little step further. You mentioned you could, that voice is still going to be there, but I think you maybe said like be in parallel with it, like don't let it control you. Someone asked, is it possible to shut down that little negative voice rather than having to deal with it forever? That's what
I don't think so. I really don't. I think that you're going to develop more confidence as you go and things are going to become natural, right? But there are going to be instances where this insecurity is going to creep up. The more you grow, the more you take risks. We don't do these things in places of stillness or safety or comfort. And we teach our clients that all the time. Like, you don't grow in these places of comfort. So the more you step out of your comfort zone, the more it's going to rear its head. But the beauty of like really learning how to fight through it and process through it is that when it does show up, it's not going to derail you anymore. It's just there. You notice it. It's uncomfortable. And then you can just acknowledge it and continue on with your journey. But I think if you don't do these things, if you don't help yourself through this process, then it kind of really is a sticking point for sure.
Okay. That sounds good. I'm going to keep us moving because we have so much great content to cover. And this, I think, obviously is a perfect segue because there does feel to me like there's a fair amount of overlap between imposter syndrome and perfectionism. So I'm going to let you just kind of get into the meat of this one.
Yeah, perfectionism is definitely a huge symptom of imposter syndrome. And I talked about it a little bit already, just how it shows up, where everything has to be perfect before you can launch the thing. And I see this all the time with my coaching clients or therapists in general, where it's the website isn't good enough. I have one page up, but it's not functional. Like, I have a site today, but I don't like the wording. I have a logo, but I don't love it. So I'm not going to put it on a business card. And like, there are all these ways that it shows up that prevents us from moving forward. When in reality, being existent and visible is so much better than non-existent, because you can always edit and revise, and these things can always be improved. But without them being out to the world, your clients are never going to find you. and people are not going to know that you exist. So it really is a matter of fighting through that high level of anxiety and control of like, I've got to be able to do this. And this includes going into expert mode where you feel like you can't ask for help or guidance or mentorship or coaching or support, and feeling like you have to know it all or do it all or figure it all out on your own before you can ask the question or put the information out there. And it's just another preventative way from being able to move forward. And if we're talking about private practice and jumpstarting your business, you have to be able to ask questions. You have to be able to put yourself out to the world. So getting through the perfectionism is a major part of this. And again, going back to failure being a good thing, we have this negative connotation with it, but failure is so important. And making these mistakes and learning and overcoming from them, that's really a big part of being a small business owner. And I think that's really crucial because you're a human being working with other human beings. Mistakes are going to happen. And it's just about showing up and just owning those things too. And I think that's a really big part of this.
I would definitely agree. Kind of coming around full circle to strategies on how to overcome it. I would imagine part of that is letting yourself make those mistakes, realizing it's not the end of the world. And then the next time you come upon that, thinking, you know what, I got through this before, I can get through it again. But what are some of your strategies?
Yeah, that's a big one for sure. So the affirmations that I mentioned before, having a therapist is so crucial with all of this stuff, like being able to really talk through a lot of this, having good supervision, having good mentorship, having a group of colleagues who you can bounce these ideas off of. I have a mastermind group with 5 other people, and we are doing this stuff all the time. And all of us would be like quote unquote successful running multiple businesses, and yet we're all experiencing perfectionism, self-doubt, insecurity, imposter syndrome. So it's really helpful to get the idea out there, have different eyes on it, and then be able to take some feedback and move on from there. I think getting into movement is also really important when we're getting really into this anxiety mindset, this perfectionistic mindset, because everything is up here. We really have to be able to get into our bodies. We have to be able to ground ourselves, and we have to be able to let go of that a little bit. So I really do still believe in the power of imperfect action. Build the plane as you fly it. So doing everything in reverse. And an example that I can think of, you start a new electronic medical record system, but you won't start getting clients because you don't know the record system yet. So you're going to perfect the record system. You're going to learn how it works. You're going to learn the notes. You're going to learn how to do the templates. You're going to learn how to do the billing. While in that time, you could have been open for business, learning how to do this stuff as you're going. But instead, you're just allowing yourself to create a barrier where you're saying, I'm not going to officially open my doors for my practice until I figure out A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. It's like, no, this is not how this goes. We want to do it counterintuitively, creating that process as you're in the thick of it, because otherwise that anxiety takes over and there's always going to be an excuse as to why you don't pursue it.
That reminds me of the people always say, you don't apply to a job that has 10 things they need in the job. If you always waited till you had all 10 of those things for that job, you're never going to get that job, or you're never going to be able to apply. And so, I think it applies here too, that you're saying, like, don't wait till it's perfect to do it. Just launch and learn. And it goes back to no one's going to know any better because, the imposter syndrome. So everybody else is doing it. So I love, this is also great. So thank you so much. And I think that, the 6 simple strategies to boost your business, like these aren't really business strategies, but I think what's so important is if you don't have this base of kind of good business mental health, then it's hard to launch your business successfully. So I love that we started here. And so excited to see what's next.
All right. Well, this one I think comes a little closer to what you were just speaking to. So creating valuable content and why that is important. And really, as someone sitting on the sidelines and receiving Patrick's emails and content every day, it's incredible. I mean, he keeps me incredibly engaged. I always know what he's up to. I always know what's trending, from a topic standpoint. So Patrick is the perfect person to speak to why it's so important to create valuable content and content, I think, that comes through consistently.
Yeah, I think that, I'm glad we started with imposter syndrome and perfectionism, because although, like Jess mentioned, they're not exactly tips, right? We
No.
have to have that mindset in order to be able to do any of this stuff successfully. And that is a great segue into content creation, because if you know my audience, if you know what I put out to the world, it's all about authenticity. It's all about consistency. It's all about the brand being very consistent with my values. And therapists that are listening right now, it is okay to be yourself. It's okay to use your own authentic language and how you speak. I curse a lot. I'm reining it in right now, but if you really want to show up the way that you show up in the world, because creating valuable content is not as simple as just like what I see a lot of people do is share someone else's content. Just share someone else's graphic, share someone else's 5 self-care tips in a very neutral color scheme, but it's not your own wording. It's not your own perspective. It's not your own lens. So really, it's not really attracting your audience, because it's not you showing up with your own take on something. We're not recreating the wheel with content creation. Like, I'm not the only private practice coach in the world. There's many, but we all have our different spins. We all have our different perspectives. We all have a different way that we show up to the world. It's the same thing for your therapy clients. So you're not the first person to ever start a private practice. You're not the first person to talk about anxiety management or self-care, but putting your own spin on it is really, really important. Putting your own lens on it, your own authentic voice, your own language, words that you like to use in sessions, lines from movies that you enjoy watching that are relatable, like things that are relatable. And I firmly believe that relatability is accessibility, because you got to think about how many people are looking for help and support, but they don't feel like they can call you because, and I do Psychology Today audits all the time and website audits. And I had a TikTok series where I made fun of a lot of Psychology Today profiles for how bad they were. And what I see is the same thing over and over and over again. I am a trauma-informed therapist who will walk alongside you and guide you through your journey, and pictures of stacked rocks. And it's like, just be different. Why would I call you when there's 50 profiles that say the same thing, but then there's one that speaks exactly to what I'm looking for, that uses language that matches my own, that curses in their content, that shares something relatable? I mean, it makes such a big difference.
I'll definitely give a +1 on that one. As someone that works at Spruce for years and has looked at probably thousands of websites of mental health providers, aka our customers or prospects, a lot are the same. And the ones that, immediately look different make, me more interested in, are they, not that I need them as a therapist at this moment, but just seeing the difference in some of them. And I can't even tell you how many stacked rocks I've seen. I mean, it is a nice image, but it is true. I think, and that's what I love about your emails, Patrick, is like they're always something like that gets your attention, so you pay attention and read what you're saying next. So I love this.
And one thing too, oh, sorry to cut you off, Patrick. It's actually about the content you share. Is I always love your personal anecdotes and your stories about your life, because I came up, in therapy, always believing that your therapist shouldn't be telling you things about themselves, that it's not about them, or that they need to keep their private life private. And what I really love about you is how authentic you are. And you always show up and you always share very personal things. And it makes me feel closer to you, like I can relate to you. And it sounds like that's something that you're saying is more acceptable these days, is to be yourself and to share those stories. Would you say that's universally true now?
I think we're moving into a new era of psychotherapy where authenticity really matters and relatability really matters. We're also talking about the power of social media, right? And people going on TikTok to get advice, and people going on Instagram to get advice. And you never know when you say something that's going to come across to someone that's going to catch their attention. And as someone who is ADHD, I can't deal with like the lengthy, wordy, buttoned up stuff. I need to get right to the point. I need it to be engaging. And so many people do, right? Like, our attention spans are so short in general. We spend an average of 3 seconds on a website before we make a decision to move on or not. If you're not capturing someone's attention, if you're not grabbing them right away, kind of letting them know, like, I get it, I understand the struggle. And you're not disclosing as a therapist for your own self-interest. You're disclosing because language is rapport building. You can create instantaneous rapport before you even meet the client. And for example, when I started out, I think our niche is a version of us, and I've said that forever. I used to only work with men who struggle with addiction. I used to have a gambling addiction, and my profiles were all very buttoned up and very professional and very anti what I would teach you to do today. Um, and I wouldn't get a lot of calls. But then I started cursing my content. I think I dropped the F bomb a few times. Talked about how scary vulnerability can be. And I started getting bombarded by all these young adult men who were like, oh, you're not going to judge me for how I speak. And that's when the light bulb moment kind of happened. And that's what I teach all of my coaching clients to do. And that's what I teach my group therapy client or therapist to do. Share your story, share a little bit about your own struggle, because I think so often people just want to know that you get it and you're not going to judge them for what they're bringing in the door. And we can't do that by talking like a walking DSM or like a walking resume, which I think is just sometimes strictly connected to our own insecurity and imposter syndrome about I need to prove how competent I am.
Someone had a question, about content and authenticity and be you, right? Your spin. How do you do that if you have multiple therapists? So you need to kind of have multiple spins on one website or, one email. What tips would you say to do that?
Yeah. So, I ask my group practice clinicians on their about me's to just be very personable. So showing off their tattoos, showing off their dyed hair, um, using language that they would use in sessions. Some of them that specifically work with millennials. There's lots of references to media references like TV shows and music. We specialize in the neurodiverse community, the LGBTQ community, and the BIPOC community. We have a lot of intersectionality and overlap in our practice. So everyone's kind of talking about their own experiences. Um, Myself, as a autistic ADHD therapist and entrepreneur, I talk about that a lot because I think that's what's making it feel safe for someone to contact me or for someone to feel safe enough to pick up the phone. And so I think you can have different spins on that. Then about SEO on your service pages, you just want to have things feel consistent. You want values driven practice interwoven throughout your practice. So whatever specialty areas you have, just make sure your your pages are consistent. Like obviously we need to use keywords for SEO purposes, but you also want to make it not sound like you're just saying therapy for anxiety, therapy for anxiety, therapy for anxiety. And the way you can do that, and I teach people to do this all the time, is use the word anxiety, use the word trauma, use the word depression, then break down, free associate, brainstorm all the ways their anxiety, depression, trauma shows up personally, interpersonally, at jobs and relationships, etc., without saying the actual words. So if you can write content without saying the actual clinical buzzword, that's really relatable stuff. And that's when you start to get to that next level of content creation and relatability. You still have to throw those words in there from time to time for that purpose, but you just don't want to use the word anxiety 100 times on a page. There are so many ways to write about how anxiety shows up and how anxiety kind of manifests and what it's like to experience anxiety without ever having to say the actual word.
I have a question, Patrick, from a cadence standpoint. I mean, you're pretty prolific, and it seems like you're pretty steady with respect to the amount of content you release on any given week. Do you have any recommendations for the folks on this call around how often they should be publishing content, whether that's email or a social post or a blog article or what have you?
Yeah, I mean, consistency is key in content creation. And what I always think about is like if you go on a restaurant's Facebook page and they haven't posted since 2019, you're probably thinking like, oh, they're closed, right? Like they don't serve food anymore. So what we really want to do, we want to have consistency. And you can batch content. There are so many ways to do that where you can create a bunch and just have something post it for you, and like plenty of services that do that. But I would say you really want to be posting on social media, on your Instagram, your Facebook, your TikTok, whatever the case may be, 3 to 4 times a week consistently, blogging at least 4 times a month. And that may feel really overwhelming, but there are strategies to do that. And that means maybe you're building in 1 hour a week where you just create content. And then one blog post can be turned into 20 different social media posts. So you don't have to recreate something for every single piece of content that you do. You can actually just repurpose it in different platforms. And I think it's just important to make sure that you're doing this consistently. And then you can use a platform like Buffer or Later or Social Bee or whatever, where you can just load up a bunch of graphics and content you've created and then schedule it to post throughout the week so that you don't have to remember like, oh, I've got to do this today, or, oh, I forgot to do content this week. And that starts to build. And that's when it really gets like unmanageable and you start to feel like, I'm not really able to do this. I can't keep up with the demands that I've created for myself. I have newsletters right now scheduled through the end of April, but I had them set for every single Friday. But I didn't write those all in one day. Like a couple of days when inspiration hits me, I write a bunch of stuff and then I just schedule it. And that way I don't have to do it throughout the month and I don't have to think about it.
That's great advice. I do some of that myself in my job, and it's incredibly helpful. Love this. So I'm going to keep us going just because of timing. So next up, it's talking about connecting with ideal clients. And I imagine that this is something that people face all the time is, all right, sure, I've got clients, but how do I get the ideal client? Can you talk to us about that?
Yep. And this is something I could talk about forever, but to be succinct as possible, in coaching programs that I teach and content creation courses, we start with exercises where you make lists. We start to brain dump and free associate, and you're just making 3 different lists. One column is all the characteristics and traits of clients that you love working with. Like they light you up, they energize you. You don't even notice the clock has gone 50 minutes by the time the conversation's over. Middle column is like, yeah, things I feel really proficient in, things I feel really skillful in. I'm not passionate about it, but I'm good at it. Column 3 is probably the most important. All the things you don't enjoy working with, because we have to know both. We have to know column 1 and 3. We have to know what we love and what we don't. And the reason that's important is that's why networking is important, because someone may not love working with clients who struggle with ABC, but someone you met for coffee does. And that's a great relationship and a great way to refer clients to the appropriate landing spot. So I really do like doing it that way. Then we go through the exercises, like I just said, listing out the experiences and the ways that depression, trauma, anxiety, imposter syndrome, perfectionism manifest, how they show up, actual real life examples. Then you start to put that in place, because far too often I see, well, I want my niche to be women, or I want my niche to be kids. And it's like, well, that's not specific enough, especially when you're thinking about how many therapists are in private practice, right? There's enough clientele to go around because everyone needs therapy. But in reality, if you are not honing in on who you like to support, your marketing, your content creation, your website, everything will reflect that you don't know who you enjoy specializing in or supporting. And I'm going to trademark this probably one day, but I always say you can't be the Applebee's of therapy, and you can't do it all well. And you have to be able to really parse through like I would say if 2 to 3 niches is fine. When you start seeing, oh, I want to work with 9 different groups of people, it gets really challenging. The one thing I will say though, is if you can hone in on your client, if you can hone in on your niche, you can write really captivating content without using diagnostic terminology, you're going to attract clients who are not your ideal client, who are not your niche client, because someone's going to read something you wrote and they're going to find it relatable and they're going to call you. So everyone gets really worried that, well, if I'm narrowing in, then I'm losing all of these calls. And in reality, that's just couldn't be further from the truth. And if you want to be a private pay practice, if you don't want to take insurance, you have to really hone in on who you're specializing in and supporting, because otherwise, why would anybody call you?
Question about that, Patrick. For folks who are just starting out, who may be feeling like, well, I just want clients. I mean, I want to cast this big blanket and just get as many folk. I mean, at what point do you feel that real nichiness should come in from the get-go, or once you have the luxury of kind of refining your parameters a bit?
You can definitely refine, especially first coming out of grad school or community mental health, where you've been a generalist, you've worked with everybody. I think you want to refine as you go, though. You want to kind of be paying attention to those columns, that list of characteristics and traits and pain points and struggles that you do and don't enjoy working with. It's going to show up because you, as a solo practitioner, only have so much capacity in your private practice. So you're going to have to refer clients out. That's just the reality of it. So, and you're not going to be a good fit for everybody. So start paying attention to that early on. start honing that in early on. You can also niche down around the way that you work with people. You can niche down around personality and style, and like that's okay too. So it doesn't have to be specifically geared towards your client's struggles or lived experiences or pain points. I do often think that our ideal client is a version of us. And I think for most of us, that probably feels true in small business ownership, and that evolves. So that's not like finite, it's not binary, it's definitely not black and white. Whoever you love working with today, that could change in 3 months, 6 months, a year down the road. And it's going to change over time. The more training you do, the more expertise you have, the more specialty areas you start to develop, you're going to start to see that evolve. And it definitely doesn't have to be, whatever I decide today, that's going to be the rest of my career.
I think that's great advice. Just that flexibility and knowing that you don't have to commit to something forever. It can evolve as you do. I love that. Cool. I'm going to keep us going. So talking about authenticity, which is 100% who you are, let's kind of dive into this one.
Yeah, I think that this is just really showing up and in alignment with who you are and your values. And I think that allows you to really tap into that authentic self. It'll show up in your marketing, it will show up in your content creation, it will attract and repel. So Carrie, you mentioned you like reading my newsletters because they're relatable. I talk about my own experiences. Some people don't like that. I get a lot of emails sometimes that I've cursed too much in one of my emails and they would like me to help them unsubscribe. So when you start to develop your audience, when you start to show up authentically, you're not going to be for everybody, and that's okay. In reality, it shouldn't be. And as a therapist, as you start to show up authentically, you're going to feel more in alignment with your clientele, with your caseload, with the people who are calling you. It's going to feel a lot more natural for you to kind of unmask in that way. And I know unmasking is challenging for a lot of populations of people. Um, but ultimately, being able to really show up as you, using really authentic language, using really highlighting and showcasing your personality, self-disclosing a little bit. I talk about my gambling addiction and autism diagnosis openly. I have the privilege as a cis het white man to do so, but at the same time, it breaks down barriers and it breaks down the wall that someone might be experiencing or feeling like nobody else gets it. Nobody else has experienced this. When I was struggling with gambling addiction, I had such a hard time finding a therapist because nobody really understood what I was going through. And I think that's what we all want, is just to feel understood. And that's what our clients want. So the more you can share a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your struggle, and a little bit about how you show up, the more you're going to connect to your audience, the more you're going to connect to your ideal clients, the more the phone is going to ring with people who are like, I'm calling you because I want you to be my therapist, opposed to like, I've called 35 people on site today and I'm just going to go with whoever calls me back first, which happens. And that's also reality. But this is really going to help you jumpstart this and get a kind of a head start on most of the people who are doing things the same exact way. And one way to do this is to go through, like, Google search therapist near me and just look at websites, look at Psych Today pages, look at Therapy Den pages, etc. See what draws you in and what makes you want to call them vices versus what does the opposite, and pay attention to that stuff. Really trying to, show up the way that you want to show up in this profession, because I think that is also advocacy at its highest level, is just being able to show up and really be there for the people who really need you the most.
I love that. When you mentioned that every now and then you get somebody who writes back and says, you swear too much, or I don't want to know about that, unsubscribe me. How does that make you feel? And then do you have to talk yourself off the ledge if it makes you feel bad?
I would be lying, if I didn't get impacted by some of that stuff. Usually it doesn't happen often. And I think our brains hyper focus on the negative more than the positive, where like you get 100 positive email responses and one person who says that. But, I think that the challenge is when you develop an audience, when you start to grow, a reputation, is that you're going to be more open to feedback and criticism. And we're human beings. So even if it's like valid criticism or feedback, you're still going to be impacted. So I think it's just, I do not need to be talked off the ledge, but there has been one case where I typed something and I was like, oh, I want to send it. And I just like, Let me give a very generic response. The unsubscribe button is at the bottom. Click here with a little smiley face, little, yeah.
I love it. I love it. I do the same thing in my job. So same. I know we have one more thing we want to cover off before we get to questions. So in terms of selling yourself in this market, and I know we've kind of touched on that throughout our discussion today, but we can circle back on some of these key things that we've called out here. And you can maybe really hone in on some of the things that have worked well for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, consistency on social media is key. We've got to play the algorithm game, and that doesn't work when you're just posting once in a blue moon, and then wondering why, it's not getting any traction. I think you have to pay attention to where your audience spends their time. So if you're working with, professionals in the workplace, you might be on LinkedIn. If you're working with millennials, you might be on Instagram. If you're working with a younger generation, you might be on TikTok. Just paying attention to where you're spending your energy is really important. Um, Networking is so crucial, and I can't stress that enough. I just always have looked at it as reciprocal relationship building, and we are helping professionals. Most of us, we're trained in relationship building. I know a lot of you are introverted. I myself am introverted, but you can do one-on-one networking. You can do Zoom coffee. Like, getting to know people in your community is so important for referrals, because you're going to be much more likely to gain referrals from people you've met versus just throwing your name in a Facebook thread of 30 therapists who are also doing the same. So I think as human beings, we're more likely to refer to people that we've connected with. The know, like, and trust factor is important when we're making referrals. That goes for businesses, that goes for individuals. So think about that when you're referring. If I have to, I refer to Spruce a lot, right? Because I trust y'all and we have a relationship. If I was referring to a phone system and technology system that didn't do what it said it did, or the service was really poor, or customer service sucked, that's a reflection on me too. So I think that's why networking is so crucial. Also, it's free, it's low cost. I know therapists, we love free and low cost. Like, go get coffee with someone, go get lunch, do Zoom lunch, put your name into the local therapist Facebook groups, not the big ones like mine and others. Like, that stuff gets lost in the shuffle. But introduce yourself in your local communities. Hey, I'm so and so. I work with population A, B, and C. I'd love to connect with people in the area and just, build some relationships. Everyone's looking for connection. Everyone needs referrals. Network with psychiatric providers. Their caseloads are enormous. They don't have the time to go sort through Facebook to find referrals. Networking is vulnerable. You're putting yourself out there. You're shooting your shot. Sometimes you're going to get shot down. When I started networking at first, I would send messages to all the halfway houses in my area. Hey, can I come tour your halfway house? Because I probably am going to, at some point in time, have a client who may need to come to one of them. I want to see what kind of environment you have. I want to see if you have a clinical component. Those became really good referral sources for me at first when I was working with that population of people. So it's just all about establishing and building relationships. I think that's what a lot of this is about. And I know that a lot of the reactions to networking and marketing is always like, oh, that makes me feel gross or salesy or sleazy or like a car salesperson. But in reality, like, it's so important. It's probably one of the most important things you can do just starting off, especially when you don't have a lot of resources to invest in your marketing, into your web design, into your SEO, and the other things that really help bring clients in the door. So this is by far a way that I think will fill your doors. Sorry, y'all. Energy levels are still not back, so my brain's not always on board. This will definitely fill your caseloads, like being able to really fill the slots in your schedule by connecting with other people. But it's also going to ensure that you're referring clients to the appropriate landing spots too. So when someone calls you and says, I'm struggling with this, and you're like, oh, that's not really my jam, or I don't really specialize in that, you can send that person to someone who loves working with that struggle or concern. And for me, that's really important. So, like, I don't work with disordered eating. If someone was to call me saying I want a therapist who specializes in, I have an eating disorder, I have contacts who I've made through relationships where I know very confidently I can send that person that way and they're going to get taken care of. So that's a really important piece of owning a small business, I think.
That's great. That's great. And one quick question before we get to everybody else's questions. If you are someone who maybe feels like, I don't know if I can sell myself. I mean, I would imagine you could bring on a part-time marketing person or you could outsource some of these things that may not be your strong suit. Have you done that or heard of folks doing that?
Oh yeah, I mean, outsourcing is a big part of business growth too, and some of you may be at that stage where you're starting to look for some additional help, and whether that be someone that creates some social media content for you, or handles some marketing stuff, or SEO, or even scheduling, billing, answering the phones, like trying to think about the things you hate doing, don't want to do, don't
Right.
want to learn how to do. Really, really great time to start thinking about, investing in something else.
Yep. Cool. Well, I don't want to cheat people from getting their questions answered. Jess, did you see any that you'd love to call attention to, or do you want me to run through them?
Yeah, there's a ton. So well, so one question is, like you mentioned, finding your niche. Someone's concerned that will make people reluctant to call them. But from what you just said, it sounds like that's okay, because you need to focus on the people that are in your niche. Is that right?
Yeah, that's totally okay. And again, if you learn how to write content in a way that speaks to experiences and pain points, right? Like there's so much overlap in terms of how people experience life. So you're still going to get calls from people who aren't your ideal client or your niche or whoever the case may be, because they're going to read one sentence that you wrote and you're like, yeah, that sounds like someone I could talk to. Or they're going to see your profile picture and they're going to be like, this looks like someone I can talk to. And I think that it's really important to realize, like, there are so many people out there looking for therapists. We get really focused on like, there's only this little amount. And if I don't attract everybody, then nobody's ever going to call me again. That's just not the reality. And I think that's a lot of imposter syndrome talking to.
Another question. Obviously, I think everyone's really enjoying all this wealth of information. And do you offer group consulting to help therapists, since you're not doing
So
individual anymore?
I had a 4-month take the leap program last year, but I just don't have the energy anymore post surgery. I've realized I've had to cut some things out. I do some small 2-day crash courses here and there. We just did a content creation course in early January. That was 2 days of niching down content creation and learning how to network and market. But with all the retreats I have coming up, I probably won't launch one again until June or July. But you can certainly join my Facebook group, All Things Private Practice Therapy. And you can certainly join the newsletter where I curse too much in and stay up to date on updates there too.
Thank you. Another one I liked that someone wrote, they said that, they're trying to network with other providers, but they've been hit with you can pay me if you want. It's kind of a good transition to what we just talked about. But how do they find someone that doesn't want to get paid for their mentorship or consulting?
Yeah, I think, well, we've got to differentiate mentorship and consulting from networking. Like, if you're looking to go talk with someone for an hour and say, teach me how to start a private practice, they're probably not giving their time away for free.
Yeah.
But if you're saying, I want to connect with someone in my community just to meet more people, that's a very different story. And what I suggest to people, my group practice clinicians included, is to put little introductory statements into I want to emphasize the local therapist Facebook groups. Again, introduce yourself. But what I often see is, hey, my name's Patrick. I take insurance A, B, C, and D. I work with these clients. Here's my link. Send me clients. And nobody's going to send you clients if that's how you introduce yourself to the community. You have to start connecting. So instead of saying that, what I would say is, hey, I'm Patrick. I specialize in working with. I would love to meet some of you for Zoom coffee or lunch or coffee in general. Is anyone interested in meeting and growing their community? You'll be shocked at how many people are just really receptive to that, because I think we all need that. And private practice is pretty isolating. So just getting that additional support is pretty easy to do.
All right. There's a few others, and there's a few people thanking you, Patrick. So that's definitely coming up. Any other tips for finding your niche?
Yeah, I think you've got to do the deep dive into who you enjoy supporting, like the struggles, the pain points, the characteristics, the traits. Take away the pressure of feeling like you have to have just one. I always suggest 2 is fine. Once you get past 2, it starts to get a little dicey. But you don't have to be so specific where you're like, I only work with, 36-year-old neurodivergent entrepreneurs who own private practices. Like, you don't have to be that specific. That's just a version of me now. You can just say, like, I love working with, if you're going to say, I love working with men. Okay, great. Now let's break it down. What struggles are they experiencing? What pain points are they picking up the phone for? A strategy or an exercise I do in coaching is I like to ask people their favorite relatable movie or TV character, who they really enjoy, and start to write about why would that person pick up the phone to come to therapy. And that's not to say that person is your niche or your ideal client, but it gets you into that creative process where you can start writing creatively and start getting out of your way of like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to content create. And that can really lead to some cool segues as well.
Nice. I love it. We tackled some really great territory. I wish we could take all the questions, but I'm going to just quickly jump to our resource slide here. You can learn more about Spruce Health and all things private practice. And you can reach out, of course, to Patrick or Jess on myriad channels here. Incredible session, you guys. I love everything that we touched on today. Patrick, you are always a wonderful guest speaker, and we would just have you every month if we could. I just want to quickly touch on what we've got going on next month. So join us. We're going to be talking about creating more efficient patient care by connecting secure communications with secure task management software. We're going to be welcoming Doc Health to the podium, the proverbial podium, and we're just going to touch on how to accelerate administrative patient workflows, drive greater accountability, and create optimal efficiency and access and collaboration between care team and patients. So look for that invitation in the follow-up email that I'll be sending out today, and hopefully we will have you again. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Jess. Have a great
Thank you so much, Patrick.
See y'all.
Bye, guys.
Bye.